I think most in the region would support.
Yeah, Mr. Wiedefeld, let me jump on the silver line for a minute because I know there's a lot of questions about it, and I'll maybe start with more of a declarative and then have you kind of react to it. So I think one of the confusing things for the public has been a series of dates that have been out there about the completion of a project. But in reality, Metro is really the only agency that can put a date out for when it will begin, and that's based on the timeline of testing, and then a discussion with the airports authority about outstanding issues, and then our own testing, we take delivery and so on. The airports authority has at various times put out dates and talked about spring and early spring and late spring. But as far as I know, Metro's both internally and externally has been pretty consistent. Has anything changed in terms of timeline, especially given some articles that were in the press today, since September, when there was that discussion about when substantial completion would take place?
No, sir, not from our perspective. We have been consistent in trying to lay out for people so they understand how this process works. Some of the dates, I mean, I do understand how some of the dates have been put out there because there's a contractual relationship that Emma has with their different contractors. So they are working through that, and they have, different agendas there. So that's where some of these dates come, and they're dates associated between their contractual relationships. That really has nothing to do with us. That is their issue. From our perspective, it's really twofold. Is one, we need to have a system. We need to take on this portion of the system when we all agree that it's safe to operate first and foremost, and that we also protect the future financial investment for the region. Because when that project gets turned over to the authority, the transit authority, that is ours for 100 years. So we've got to make sure that everything that we paid for is there so that the region doesn't pay for it going forward. So that is, the philosophy that we've had from the beginning. And as you know, that project's had significant issues. So we're just running some of those to ground. But there are certain things right now that are still in play that the airport has control over. But just basic things like they need a safety certification from the Metropolitan Washington Safety Commission for what they've done. That's nothing to do with anything that we've done yet. So they need that, and they can't go forward to that. We can't go forward without that. They need certificates of occupancy, just basic, that we all deal with in the zoning world. So those are things that need to be in place before we could even start to do what we need to do. We have roughly a 90-day window to do what we need to do, but that 90-day window has not started. It will not start until some of these basic things are met, but also till we have some of these other issues nailed down. So we know that what we're all buying into, because once we own it, we own it. And so I think, our position is to protect the region, make sure that it's safe, and that we're protecting the finances of the entire region that's going to pay for it.
A quick technical note before we continue with questions. If anybody saw the screens going a little weird, our YouTube is down, but Zoom is still continuing, so we're still recording. And so the rest of it will be posted at the end of the meeting. So just want to give a quick technical note. Mr. Alcorn.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Wiedefeld, I appreciate your comments just now and the challenges with getting a date. I think it would be helpful for some of us to acknowledge, frankly, the inconvenience, if not more, of the situation where we're not giving out dates. There are a lot of business owners along the Silver Line Phase 2, even the Silver Line in Phase 1, who are depending on and planning for the opening of this. So I for one, basically acknowledge that it's a situation where we can't give a solid date, but frankly, we do need to acknowledge many of these people actually paid for much of the construction of the Silver Line, and therefore I think have a certain sense of ownership that we should all take seriously. My question though is back to what you said about the regional discussion of the revenue model for Metro. I think I couldn't agree more that this needs to be a regional discussion, but I would just request as you and as all of us talk about financing Metro, it's not just fares. The jurisdictional subsidies are significant. And I think that has to be part of the conversation. Personally, I think we do need to look at some sort of dedicated regional funding source to keep that going. But if we can get to that conversation, let's not forget what we as local governments in Northern Virginia anyway are putting into the kitty and have been for a long time. So thank you.
If I may, I on the Silver Line, believe me, I'm gonna do everything in my power to have that open by the time I leave here. But I can only control what I can control right now. But believe me, it's something that I am working on literally hourly to get that open, because I understand how important it is to obviously to Virginia, but to the region. So that's for sure. And yet you're exactly right. I mean, at the end of the day, pre-COVID, you know, we were receiving roughly about 40% of our expenses out of the fare box, and the rest of it came from the taxpayers and from local governments and state governments. So I think that is a decision that is made at that level, and that's why any future is at that level.
And, right before you, Mr. Phelps, I actually saw Mr. Walkinshaw using the raise hand function here on Zoom. So Mr. Walkinshaw, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope you all can hear me. Can you hear me?
Can we turn that up a little bit?
How's that? Can you hear me now? No.
See if we can
Okay.
turn you up in the room a little bit more.
Okay. I can try to speak louder.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me now?
That's much better.
Okay, all right, thank you. Yeah, Mr. Wiedefeld, thank you for joining us. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. I just want to go back to the 7,000 series and the root cause analysis that you mentioned in your opening presentation, and see if you can just give us any more details in terms of the timeline as to when you expect that analysis to be complete. Obviously, we're facing a situation in Fairfax County, probably not unique in the region, where we have 20 minutes between trains at a time when at least some number of federal employees are going to be returning in person to the office over the next several weeks and months. So as you can imagine, folks are anxious to have some sense of that timeline. I suspect my colleague Supervisor Faust was going to ask a similar question maybe.
Yeah, I cannot give you an exact timeline. We did this 90-day pause where we weren't even trying to put out the 7,000 series cars. Just so you understand, we had gotten to a point where we needed to inspect the cars every day. That left us with roughly out of 748 cars, we could get 748 cars, we could get 40 out, which is basically 5 train sets. So the amount of energy and time we were focusing on that versus trying to get to the core issue. That's why we've done that, just so you understand that. So that's what we're trying to do. We obviously, as an agency, want to get there as quickly as possible, but we also have to recognize that the safety of this is what's driving the time. So we hope that we will have much more information where we can start to test different theories of what could be causing this. As I mentioned, it may be a combination of factors. So one of the things that we're moving ahead with is in effect, well, but it's without being too technical, but basically it's the equipment that we put in the tracks so that we can monitor the entire truck, meaning the trucks are the 2 sets of wheels that you see on each end of a car. So we will monitor them in real time, every time they cross one of these, in effect, this equipment, and get the data in real time. So if there's anything going on in that truck, whether it's wheel, whether it's any movement of any sort, or other things that we monitor, that we would pull that out of there as a mitigation so that we can start to reintroduce the 7,000. To do that though, we have to get the equipment, we have to install it, we have to get the Washington Metropolitan Safety Commission to certify that that is safe to do it that way, just as we had to do when we were trying to measure the back-to-back. So that will take time. I apologize, but that will take time. So we will get them out as quick as we can. I would mention though, currently, even with the reduced fleet that we have, our capacity, we're using about just under 50% of our capacity. So we have capacity in the vehicles. I understand the headway issue clearly is the other issue. But in terms of a capacity standpoint, we can handle more riders, but unfortunately not at the headways that we would all say.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for your service to our region.
Can we go Mr. Faust and then Ms. Crystal, then Mr. Ferrante?
Thank you, Mr. Rico, for the presentation. I'm probably the last one who believes this, but I was in construction for 30 years and a lot more complex projects than this linear development of a rail system that we were always able to schedule. And the reason you do that is twofold. One is so people can plan around the anticipated completion date, which I think people are entitled to do after all this time. Secondly is to manage to the completion date, because if you don't know what the goal is, you can't achieve it. I don't understand why you and the airport can't sit down together, figure out what elements are what, and schedule them. And then and from that point, you know what elements you have to do. You schedule, and I know, I mean, you're always, schedule's always looking into the future, always. So it's always gonna be uncertain, always. But as a tool in construction, there's nothing more important than having a schedule. Get done on time and under cost. So that's just my thought. I assume this was raised because I've made some statements that got quoted. But I believe in my heart, we're on a wrong course. We're not scheduling completion and pursuing that schedule.
I agree. I don't control their schedule of construction, and I haven't controlled it for the last few years. I mean, that, you know, as you know, that project had different schedules along the way that had nothing to do with us. We have given them the types of data that we need, or the types of things we need closed, and asked them for the schedule to do that, because then we can build, as you say, then we can build our schedule around that. But they need to do the work, meaning they with their contractors to get to that. So they need to come up with a schedule that supports that. That isn't ours to create. Now, what we try to give them is, these are the things that need to be done. Now, again, you work with your contractor to work out the schedule to do that. And I think we're very close. I think we're very close, but we don't have anything definitive yet to say.
I just wanted to join Mr. Walkinshaw's line of question. First, thank you for joining us. If this is the last time we see you, thank you for the many times you've joined us and for your service. We do appreciate it. And I know it's been a challenging time. And I know the 7000 series being out of commission, cars being out of commission is one more example of those challenging times. I respect that you can't tell us when it's going to be fixed and that safety remains a top priority. I just wanted to associate myself with Mr. Walkinshaw's comments and specifically to articulate the problem, the nightmare, frankly, of this extending into the time that people are coming back to the office. To me, is not a problem of capacity. It is a problem of getting that ridership to return. And I share the following, not because the plural of anecdote is data, but because I think it's very illustrative. I had a conversation this afternoon with my husband, who paid the fee because we were late to pick up our son from daycare, in which he said, I can't take public transit anymore. And he is back to work in the office multiple days a week as a federal employee for the first time in 2 years. And I know that conversation is happening and it's multiplied across the region. And so it's really not about having the capacity, it is about those headways. And you know, we spent so many times during the pandemic talking about how are we going to make sure that the system feels safe when people are ready to get back, that it's going to feel clean and welcoming. And we are finally at that moment where people are going to make sure or make the decisions that affect their behavior for the next year or more. And to have headways this long, and we live in one of the inner regions, right? We're facing these 12, 15-minute headways, not the 20 minutes. I think that is going to have just tremendous impacts on our ability to restore ridership. So I say that not to suggest that you're not already feeling that urgency, but if I can, you know, if I can do anything, I hope it's to add on, because it's not a capacity problem, it's a ridership return problem.
I totally agree. We have to get them out there as quick as we can, particularly at this moment in time. And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Ferrante.
I thank you for 6 extraordinarily busy years and all your service. Wanted to think going forward, because it's a nagging question in my mind for months now is the 8,000 series. And whether we have done the legal steps we need to take, every step we need to take to make sure that Kawasaki is giving they're giving us trains that are going to work and that we don't face this problem.
That's a good question and understandable. We're not at that far along with the 8,000, to be frank. And we don't give them the 7,000 to say design the same car because we want them to bring, things to us. So that obviously will inform, based on what we learned with the 7K, but it isn't replicate what we had here because that's not how we competed it because they bring other things to the table. So that's what we obviously will keep a very close eye on that. But I anticipate that that's several years away, and we're going to learn from what we learned with the 7Ks as we've done every series that we've done.
Thanks.
Ms. Garvey?
No, just quickly, I assume the ridership, the way it's recovering, the way the ridership's coming, it's similar with public transportation like ours at every big city around the country? Or are we an outlier in some way on how this is happening?
We're a little bit of an outlier primarily because of the federal workforce.
Uh-huh.
Just the 40% of our peak period demand, federal workforce, that's hit us probably a little different than other places. Everyone can be, but just, we do monitor worldwide, and the growth is relatively the same, particularly on the rail side and on the bus side. It's kind of interesting. There has been a growth in bus quicker than rail that we've seen across the country and across the globe. But we're sort of in line with where people are. But we're a little bit, the federal workforce is a big issue for us. And the latest that we've had for PM is it's roughly maybe 1 day a week in, at a minimum, they could come in more, and that's all playing out live, right now. But until we know what that is, and then when in that time frame. So it's also not only how many days, but when in the day, because of the nature of our financial model. So that is a little different for us.
Thank you. I mean, your comments about having to look at distance and peak, and it just, there's obviously a lot going on. And you won't be here for that. And I take this opportunity to thank you for your service. When you came, the ship was in danger in a big way, and you really did right the ship. It was not, now we're in the rough waters again, so I think people might forget that, but I do remember how very, very difficult that time was, and I think you really did right the ship, and it can't have been easy. I'm sure it's not been. I appreciate your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Scott.
Paul, thank you again for your service, but let me ask you a question that kind of got me thinking. I think you're seeing on roadways throughout the Commonwealth, and especially on the express lane, we're seeing peak periods being very different than they were pre-pandemic. And so has WMATA began to look at ridership at different periods and how that might change moving into the future? And obviously we're kind of going through this in real time, so I'm sure that data is still being collected, but has there been thought about the long term, and we're not going to see peak periods at 6 or 7 in the morning, it may be 10 or 11 during the day? Is that something that you all are looking at and trying to compile that data and figuring out what the next decade is going to look like?
Yes, and that's been a particular interest of the board, is how do you have these resources? How can you in effect spread this out differently? So your costs have remained the same, but you're meeting the demand because the demand shifted on you. So it's that very issue. And some of that may be running higher headways later into the evening, for instance. And also obviously during the midday, rather than pull down the surface, pull down the service levels, bring them up in the midday, and maybe reduce them a bit on the peak, and flatten it a little bit more, because that seems to be what's happening in the marketplace. So that's exactly what the board has been asked us to look at, and we're continuing to do.
And Mr. Chair, if I could, David, just another thing we're looking at is reverse commuting. In the past, everyone went to the core for the most part, but now we're seeing movement, and particularly along the silver line, blue, orange, and then down south toward Alexandria through Arlington, seeing reverse commutes. That's going to be another issue that we're going to have to look at closely.
Mr. Chairman, as a follow-up, when do you think you'll have at least some of that preliminary data
I think it's going to be incorporated into the next budget cycle, because obviously there's the budget implications of that. So the budget that the board is contemplating right now starts that, and they've done some things in terms of service levels and also in terms of fares, basically recognizing, so for instance, a $2 flat fare during the weekend, because our weekend numbers are going up because people are traveling differently during that period. So the board's already taken action in that area. But in terms of a sort of a wholesale look at that it would be part of the 24 budget, which starts about 6 months from now.
I mean, we have some of the data, David. It's a question of what do you do with that? Because it's such a moving target still. We have this back to work discussion. We were planning for this sort of surge of back to work to be in January, and then Omicron hit, and so it didn't happen. It's now seeming like perhaps in the next few weeks, to the extent that there's sort of a surge back to work, we're going to get that. So I think we have been reluctant to make significant fare policy changes based on this really evolving landscape. And we want to kind of see more what the new normal is before we try to draw huge conclusions, other than acknowledging that over the course of the next year, we're going to have quite a few work sessions to discuss how we're going to shift service and fare policy and all those kinds of things. And we were going to do, under the chairman's leadership, a bigger fare policy, sort of look and potential change, getting into some of the issues like, does our distance model really make sense? We have a very complicated model. If you just show up in DC from somewhere else and you try to figure out what it's going to cost you to go from point A to point B, you got to look at peak, you have to look at what station you're going to, so most transit systems are moving away from that, and so on weekends now we've simplified it, it's $2, because we want to bring people on, we want to bring families on. People like me that have a lot of kids, you can afford to do it now versus before when it was, $7 a head to go all the way in. But broader, I mean, we kind of put that off because it's just shifting so much. We have a fiscal cliff looming. We don't want to mess with our revenues more than they already are, but we are going to do it.
Other questions?
I have a question that goes beyond, well, it's a safety culture questions, but it goes beyond just the 7,000 cars and the rolling stock. I've had this conversation with Matt previously, so this is not a surprise, but I guess I know that everything is concentrated on trying to get this 7,000 series issue resolved, but you have a number of other safety issues out there, that some of which you have identified yourselves, some of which came from the commission. Some are low-hanging fruit, some have some pretty high labor rates to address with respect to training and procedures and hiring the right skill sets. And as I've shared with Matt previously, what triggered my concern was that almost 10 months ago, Mexico City lost 26 people, had close to 80 injuries on a structure collapse. On the oldest part of our system, we're closing in on 50 years. A significant percentage of our system is 40 years old. Not just elevated structures, but other structures that carry track. And how do you accommodate the oversight of those systems and structures in terms of the right kinds of equipment, manuals, training, procedures, and oversight, as well as trying to address the more immediate concern, the tyranny of the moment with respect to the 7,000 series rolling stock?
We have a very aggressive state of good repair program in effect. And several years ago, we were in the $7 billion range. We will have that under 3 billion, roughly about 3 billion in our current program. And to do that is exactly what you're saying. You had to bring people along, and both internally and externally, whether it's training and everything else, but you've had to basically attack some of the bigger issues. Some of it is, as you mentioned, aerial structures. So we have a very detailed inspection program of that. And then we're attacking those. And you're starting to see that. Unfortunately, when we do any of those projects, it generally impacts our customers. At the same time, we're trying to build a customer base. So, I mean, there are some of our tunnels are, as you mentioned, 40+ years old that we have to get in there and do work on, which means impacting service. So the region will continue to see that, like we had to do with Safe Track, not to that degree. This is more just the standard things wear out and we got to repair them. And let's get that on a schedule versus episodic, which is, to be frank, we were several years ago, that's where we were. So we have that lined up. And basically there is a program going out the next 6 years where we can identify these are the ones that you will start to see. And they're not the, they're things that you would never see. I mean, the customer's not going to see it. They'll feel it, unfortunately, because these things, you go by at 40, 50 miles an hour on a train, you don't realize, but it's massive infrastructure that is pushing 50 years old in a lot of cases.
Well, thank you. And I agree with what Commissioner Garvey said. When you arrived, we had a long grocery list of issues to tackle. And you made incredible progress, and there's really a great legacy on your part. So thank you.
I think I'm gonna go Mr. Stork and then Ms. Backward.
Like Mr. Wiedefeld, absolutely do appreciate and value service. I think the comments you're hearing from us are one of great thanks, and it's the recognition that we've got a ways to go, and that will probably always be the case because there'll always be kind of one more thing, something else. Particularly, I wanted to I guess acknowledge that you'll be leaving. I think it's around sometime this summer. I'm not sure the exact date.
We're gonna make him stay, actually. He just doesn't know yet.
Well, I don't think you hear any, I think you'd hear a lot of support from us. Yeah, I would absolutely say that, and definitely from me. But it's part of that ability to give the kind of notice you've given and the statement that I'm moving on, and also providing an opportunity to provide that same smooth transition, which is, I think, essential to effective organization, continuing that to grow and improve and getting to good, if you will, and really the other initiatives that you focused on. I'm particularly interested in tapping into your decades of experience and knowledge, not only of the system here, and I think it was Baltimore where you were before, but also the insight that you've had of meeting leaders around the country, probably around the world, that run similar kinds of transit systems. And I know we've heard lots of stuff from consultants in the past. You should do this, you should do that, tons of consultant time. But I want to hear from you. I want to hear your unvarnished, here's where I think the opportunities are, here's where I think you've got serious issues that you need to look at differently. I'm not looking to do anything other than get your absolute honest opinion, because frankly, you have no reason not to give us your honest opinion. I mean, there's not going to be any, if you will, politics to play. It's just, your knowledge, your experience, your intellect. I would greatly value at the time that you are kind of on your final steps here, that you share that kind of insight and comments, observations, and recommendation, however you want to classify it. But I think it's really essential for us that you give us your last best bit of management and leadership qualities and share that with us. So I'm for one asking you if you could commit to doing something like that, and what, when that might occur in your life.
I mean, obviously I would do it through the board, but I'd be glad to do that. I may just make one comment. Again, thinking, in both experience and some relationships, but this is one of the best systems, clearly in the US, and if not the world. I know we have lots of issues, but I've run some major things. They all have issues at this scale. They just do. But this system and the support that we have in this region is unbelievable. It really is. I mean, this room reflects it. And that is, we're so far ahead of the game in that we have that. And I think as you think about the future is make sure you don't lose, you don't start stepping back on that, because the commitment that was made to say, okay, well, we're going to stop ignoring some of these issues, we're going to tackle them. And it's going to be painful, but we're going to tackle them. That took a lot of courage from the region to do. So I think we should, just remember that. I mean, keep it in our minds that, this is, we have a tremendous opportunity here. We've done well because of the region. And let's go forward with that and not sort of slip backwards. But I'll be glad to work with the board in any fashion they would want me to.
And from somebody who is very interested, I'd like to know that you'll do that regardless, because I think we need to hear from you, even if it means you step on a few toes. I think it's critical to our future into doing what you just said, which is to keep us at the highest level of systems in the world. So I'm looking and really hope that you'll share those insights with us. Thank you.
Chair.
Yeah, let Mr. Smucker go.
So Mr. Stork, we are going to do that. We already have, we're going to do like a little mini retreat to take advantage of that to, well, to think about the future of the system and to lay that groundwork, but also to help inform us and as we reflect on the selection of a new general manager. So we're looking at the types of questions or the characteristics or qualities in a person that based on, you know, some of the comments and the thoughts of Mr. Weefeld. So it's going to serve a dual purpose. We were going to have it a little later, just given everything that staff and everything is dealing with right now and the board is dealing with right now. But we are going to do a little mini retreat just with Paul on the board, unvarnished, you know, just let us have it. And as Mr. Wiedefeld said, you know, there is an extremely amount of high level of support around the region. During the pandemic, if there's one thing we learned is people are, and a lot of people in this region are transit dependent. And that's a lot of equity issues, you know, essential workers, you know, et cetera, et cetera. We were recently on Capitol Hill for the oversight hearing in front of Mr. Conley and his committee. And, you know, it was pretty clear across the board that, you know, they support Metro. They understand that we had, you know, there were a lot of tough questions, but they understand the importance of this system to the economic base and the foundation of this region. And it's not just a Virginia thing or just a DC thing or Maryland thing, the region. And we saw it today. Paul, do you want to mention the grant? Oh, you know, early on, yeah. So, you know, we have a great amount of support and actually a lot of optimism that the system in this region is going to come back. So we are definitely going to have a little retreat with Paul to help, you know, just sort of build on that and go from there, because it will be a very transformational period. The system Metro today is not going to be the Metro of 2, 3, or 4 years from now. It just isn't.
And I would say someone VRE, I would say VRE of a few years from now may not look at all like the VRE today. And I think that's is that we're all kind of wondering and hoping and looking for ways to bring those riders back and to truly make that difference. And as an employer in the District of Columbia, my other work life, I have a number of my employees that use Metro every day, and I get to hear on a daily basis how Metro's working. And you know, the basics are where they're at. You know, is it clean? Is it safe? You know, and those are, and obviously the trains are running, and obviously longer headways, those kind of. But those are the things that we don't necessarily look at here on a day-to-day basis, because we're trying to make sure that the system has the funding and the capital and the other things it needs, and the leadership. So, thank you.
And I love that we always call it retreats, but there's never any sandy beaches or pina coladas. Ms. Bagley.
Thank you, Chair Aguirre. So I think my question actually hopefully is a looking forward question. I was wondering if while you were here, you could speak to, excuse me, on the electrification of our buses. Excuse me, sorry, I need to take my mask off. Has all of these issues we've talked about tonight, the revenue shortfall that you're, you know, are that going to have any impact on sort of the 2030 and 2045 goals with regard to electrification of the WMATA bus fleet?
No, I mean, the board is committed to move in that direction. You know, we have roughly 1,500 buses. We buy 100 a year to keep the average age at a certain level. So that's basically where we're moving, is to start to incorporate that into it. We're looking at zero emission vehicles, not necessarily, well, obviously electric is a leader in that right now, but you know, as you think out into the future, you know, that could change. So the goal here is zero emissions. So that's what we're doing. So we have a program, we got some federal dollars to test a series of buses in this environment to see how they work. The marketplace has to meet it. Also, that's a challenge, across the country to have the vehicles there. But we also have to understand that it's just not the vehicles. It's major infrastructure investments in bus divisions of significant hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's a goal that the board has agreed to do, but it will take some time. We've done our best to give our best estimate. If we can do it sooner, we'll do it sooner. But we've also done a pretty detailed scan of what the market is and some of the conditions we'd have to meet to get there. But I don't think there's any backing off of the goal to get to the zero emission.
Great, thank you so much.
Mr. Snyder.
Sure. First, a specific question about physical safety of passengers. I've seen some data on crime. I'm wondering what Metro is doing to respond to that. That's a specific question. I have a more general question in a minute.
On that, we've taken a hard look at that. And as you know, during the pandemic, a lot of issues have come up in the community, particularly on safety, for lots of reasons, right? Some of the support systems and things like that. So we're experiencing a lot of what's playing out in the community. So we are focusing on that, but not from we don't feel we're going to rest our way out of it. We think that we have to do much more community type of policing. We're increasing our visibility, particularly on platforms and trains. We also have issues on bus. We have, as you can imagine, a very large system to try to do that in. We do, in effect, a state stat, a city stat process that we follow, where we try to apply the resources that we do have there. We do quite a bit of reach out to schools, because some of our issues evolve, with schools and after school events and things of that sort. So we're doing that. It is something that the industry as a whole is wrestling with. You may have just seen some recent articles in New York, San Francisco, Chicago, Philadelphia, significant issues. And then you add some of the other social ills, with drugs and things of that sort. What I can tell you though, oftentimes we are seen as the safe refuge. Things happen around us and people come, particularly on the rail side, come to our system for safety. Because they do feel now. Unfortunately, some things then play out in our system as a result of that. So we will continue to do it, continue to focus on it. The board is very interested in it because we understand, that sets, as I think it was mentioned earlier, that's the first thing that people think about. It's my personal safety, on a system, no matter where it is.
So yeah, I think that's going to be a critically important factor in terms of bringing people back. So a more general question relating, you've heard a lot of questions about the future and certainly that's relevant to all of us. So any additional comments about what a new business model would look like? I guess I'm one of the commuters that used to commute back and forth to DC on my private sector job. And I haven't been in the office in the last 3 months. And they did a poll of employees, and I suspect a fair number of employees are not going to want to commute at all, and some a couple of days a week. So confronting these changes, in addition to a couple of the things that you mentioned, do you have any other ideas about a change in the business model? And here's the trick part of it, that assumes the same basic level of funding.
I think that a few things. One is in the rail side, you have some capital investment, right? I mean, it's just a reality. We're not going to walk away. I don't think the region's going to walk away from that system. So that's a given. So then we've got to think, all right, within that, how do we then manage that service? Not how we want to manage it, but how the customer is asking it in effect to deliver for them. So, I think that's part of the discussion we have to have. But I also think it's a recognition of those that don't use the system, the value it provides to the region. Right? And that's where obviously a lot of the local support comes from.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what it does. It not only moves someone from A to B, but it's serving all these other goals. And you only need to look at the development that's occurring in this region around the metro stations, right? Because that's money betting on this, that is important for their economic well-being. So I think it's a conversation around both, that yes, there's the customer that has to go from A to B, but also the value that the system adds to the region at so many levels. Again, environmental, economic, equity, you know, I think we can, you know, think of other things that's why we're here. It's part of our culture in this region. It serves, you know, the visitors, you know, it does all those things. And that's where we have to figure out, you know, what's the level of support we can, you know, put towards this to maintain that.
But I think the real question was your business model. That is, we talked about some of the potential changes here, recognizing that the level of service midday may need to be higher than it is and adjusted accordingly. Other ways to get people into the system.
Well, I mean, from a pure business perspective, you have to look more at your operating costs, right? We have extensive, as you know, extensive labor agreements. So I think that's obviously has to come to the table to deal with some of these issues. We haven't done a fare increase since I've been here. You know, I mean, it's a reality. So that's, you know, I think those should be things that should be discussed as well from a pure business model perspective, because those are the raw numbers, you know, that drive things. And so they're the things that we control. And beyond that, it's a broader public policy discussion. But the things that the agency controls is cost and obviously the fares that we collect. And that also means parking. It also means joint development. It means advertising, all those things. You know, we've got to make sure that we're maximizing those from a business perspective, you know, to try to position us better as we deal with some of these other large issues that can't come out of the system itself.
Any last questions? All right, well, we thank you again so much for your time tonight. Thank you for your leadership. You're more than welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. We know how busy. So thank you again, Mr. Whitterfield, and we're gonna, because we can never get enough WMATA, we're now gonna go to our Virginia WMATA board members for a couple of updates. I turn this over to Mr. Smedberg, Mr. Letourneau.
I think I'm gonna go first. For the new members, Matt Letourneau, I am the Finance and Capital Chairman on the Metro Board, and your NVTC representative. So our committee conducted a work session on FY23 capital budget and CIP. There's, you know, really not a lot changing since our kind of evolving discussion on this. We've actually had some improvement. I think you're going to see in the final bottom line of the general manager's budget. We've been able to reduce some costs there a little bit, some vacancy savings, and then some other things that we're looking at. We do have money coming in from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, providing some additional funding for WMATA through renewal of federal dedicated capital, which we all know is PREA around here. So that's now being programmed in, especially for our out years, and that's helping to change the conversation a little bit. I have been warning you that we would run out of that dedicated funding sometime in our current capital window and the out years. We think now that that picture has improved as a result of some of the additional fundings, and that is going to get pushed out a little further beyond the current capital period. So that's good news. WMATA staff is working through the details of that legislation, so we're going to have more to report when we get there. But you know, I think it's overall it's good news. I do want to flag, and Mr. Snyder's question was timely on this. We did have, for the first time since the pandemic has gone on, a fare evasion update. For those that have been on the commission a while, with our predecessors, you know that this has been an ongoing topic of discussion. District of Columbia decriminalized fare evasion, and that certainly has kind of changed the way that this is handled. WMATA staff provided an update on the efforts to accurately detect and report fare evasion. We do have new fare gates that are going out on the system that you may have seen. Those fare gates do have some capability built into them to measure fare evasion. We don't have that data, has not come to the board yet because they are really working to refine it and make sure it's accurate. And also, of course, the fare gates are not throughout the system yet. But we are hopeful to get that. So the rail data really isn't there in any meaningful way. But on bus, there is a automatic passenger counters and manually recorded counts by bus operators. So the estimates that you're seeing, I think, are more accurate. And for Q2 of FY22, fare evasion was 34% system-wide, which is a big number. That breaks out to 42% in the district, 34% in Maryland, and 6% rate in Virginia. That compares to pre-pandemic rates of 17% system-wide, which was 22% district, 16% Maryland, 2% Virginia. So the combined revenue loss attributed to fare evasion was 10 million in the first half of 22. As I mentioned, that's really solely bus. The rail number is using a very basic baseline, which I suspect is frankly low. So that number may be higher. Frankly, there is some debate on the board about the level of priority we should put on this issue because 10 million is not a large amount of our overall budget. I'm more of the viewpoint that given our fiscal cliff situation and quite frankly, the uneven nature of fare evasion and the fact that it's affecting, there isn't a discount on our subsidies because certain customers are paying more or less than others, that it is something that we need to tackle. And I also think that, we've had some discussion about how it may be leading to some of these other sort of nuisance crimes that we're seeing. So I think there was consensus on the board to take a deeper look at the issue, take a look at some of the root causes of it, work through perhaps some of the administrative things on the district side, and work through, better data, rail data, and a better discussion about what we can really do to address that, especially if we continue on this path where we have now a gap of 400 million, so that's better. But still one where we may be in a position of having to ask for more money, and we need to be able to make sure that we're accounting for all the money that's coming. So we will be having a work session on the budget next Thursday, also in the Finance Committee, both operating and capital side. There's a number of proposals that went out for public comment. We're going to be receiving the input from the full public process on that. There were fewer respondents than normal in a normal year, which I guess makes sense given that there are fewer riders. And also I think because there really is nothing on the docket that is during a lot of controversy, quite frankly. I think the one item that the board is still really going to focus in on and make a decision about is what we call the add value bonus. I believe it's $5 for 25 is the proposal. It has a $7 million budget impact for a 6 months period. That we can debate whether that is something that will help drive ridership or not. I have my own opinions. But we're going to look at the public comment on that and also have some discussion. Obviously, to the extent there is savings in the budget, they are not going to reductions in the operating subsidies this year. They are going to reduce the reliance on federal aid because we will run out of federal aid in 24. So if we were not to move forward with that, then that's $7 million less that we're spending on the federal aid side, which preserves a little bit more of it for FY24. Why don't I turn it over to you?
Fiscal year 24.
Yep.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Paul Smedberg. I'm the Commonwealth's representative to the WMATA board, and work with my partner here, Matt, and Paul and his team, and currently service chair of the board. I was going to do a little update on safety and operations, but we covered a lot of it. But I do get a lot of questions about, obviously, Mr. Wiedefeld's announcement leaving and the search. So I'll just give a very brief update. Pretty much what we did. We have a very aggressive timeline for the search. We have a very well-regarded recruiter helping us in that process, who's handled several high-profile searches, not only here within the United States, but internationally as well. We reached out to a list of key stakeholders. We've gone through all those interviews, or the recruiter has gone through all those interviews. We've also talked to the board alternates. We had customer surveys. We're collecting and getting all that information together. That's all I have to report right now on that. But it's going well, as you can imagine. It's a very high profile job in transit. It's one of the premier jobs, obviously. And, we're hoping to get that unicorn like they did 6 years ago, because it is a very unique job. You need a strong administrator, but at the same time, in many ways, you need a politician. Just because of how we're funded, how we're structured. And so, it does present a challenge, but yet for us now at this juncture and all that we have before us and the opportunity we have before us, it's going to be a very robust discussion, I suspect, on whom that next general manager will be. So looking forward to it.
Any questions for our two board members? Go ahead to the report from our chair of the Ramada Committee. So our newly appointed Ramada Committee Chair, Mr. Walter Alcorn, chaired his first meeting of 2022. Mr. Alcorn, if you don't mind giving us a quick update.
Very quickly. So we've looked at comments on the 2023 Ramada budget, and committee members provided feedback circulated to the other NVTC members, and we got that into Ramada. We do have a couple more meetings scheduled, April 21st at 6 p.m. and June 16th at 6 p.m. and all are welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Alcorn. Any questions for Mr. Alcorn?
I did have one, and Matt, it's for you. Sorry to interrupt. You said 400 was the number. I thought a month ago it was 519.
520. So today, the general manager shared the great news that from the federal ARA program, we obtained a grant that was announced today for 120 million. So that we're reducing our kind of projection by that much. I understand the money to be similar to the money we received in the past, which means it does have some of the same contingencies to it, but it should, it will reduce the 24 numbers.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Francis?
Have you looked beyond next year? I mean, 400 is bad, but what in the
Yes.
next couple of years?
It does not get better. We have looked. And I mean, I think it's fair to say, we've done, I did a really deep dive with staff, I don't know, maybe about 2-3 weeks ago, looking all the way out. And I actually think we would have had a problem even without COVID. There's no question. When you look at where expenses were going versus where ridership and revenue is going. Those two things were not tracking together. So we would have had to have had this conversation. It's obviously much more sudden, much more stark than it would have been, and we don't have the luxury of easing into it. But it is a significant issue. Personnel drives our expenses. As the general manager indicated, we have labor contracts, and so in the current situation, there is not a lot of flexibility for Metro. I mean, what we agreed to is what we agreed to. So, or what an arbitrator decided. I was about to say, yeah, let me rephrase it. What an arbitrator decided is what they decide. And you all must know, with the inflation happening, I've mentioned it when it happened, there's clauses in the contracts that automatically kick in pay increases, 6 or 7%, was it? Off budget. So, at least in our local jurisdictions for now, without collective bargaining at the moment, some places you can do it yearly, but the way that these were structured, they kick in, so we're building that in now to our next year projections that we're going to have another one of those. Beyond that, who knows? But those same issues exist. So we really, this kind of discussion about how big Metro should be and what level of service and how we provide it. It's great for all of us to talk about all the things we want, but we will have to figure out a way to fund it in a way, and it can't be like it is now in terms of the funding level, because it won't support the size of the operation that we have today.
And John, you've been in office long enough to know when the dedicated funding debate, that didn't happen in 1 year. It took almost 3 years to really started. Jennifer was, really started to get it to, the end line. this whole discussion, this financial model, you know, Matt and his committee gaming this out with Paul and his team. I mean, it's gonna take a good 3-4 years probably to, you know, to do something. By the time we get consensus and regional, you know, cooperation and agreements, I mean, but there's gonna be a lot of tough discussions and a lot of tough choices to be made in the future, for sure. The whole model is likely gonna change. It's pretty evident.
Not to end on a negative. I feel like now we're. I mean, thanks, John. No, you know, the good news is we have opportunities. We have growth along Silver Line. We hope. You know, we have potential for exciting new projects along the Silver Line. Maybe we'll see. But you know, those things are all variables that could change and help. So, you know.
As a continued, Matthijs and I have spoken about this. I think in the WMATA committee later this year, we're going to be doing a little deeper dive into some of these exact issues, you know, some of the structural issues, some of the safety issues as well. So, yeah, we'll be able to have a lot more discussion.
And the WMATA subcommittee is open to everyone, so just a friendly reminder if anybody else wants to join. Any last questions or comments for our WMATA folks? Okay, looks like we're going to move on to our next agenda item, which will be report from the chair of the Program Advisory Committee. Our Program Advisory Committee has been very busy this past month, and the chair, Mr. Dave Snyder, do you mind giving us a report?
Sure, thanks a lot, Mr. Chairman. So the Program Advisory Committee met on February 23 to discuss actually 4 items that we'll be presenting on tonight. First is the commuter choice on the I-66 corridor, FY 2023 to 2024 project eligibility. Vision Route 7 bus rapid transit project. That's the one to connect Alexander to Places Corner Church, and 2 DRPT grant applications. Now, with respect to the first item, which is the I-66 corridor commuter choice, we discussed potential projects and eligibility of projects, as well as a prioritization going forward. So the committee will meet again in April. There are no specific recommendations for projects tonight, but this is an effort to go through what our thinking is about the projects that have been submitted and some of the priorities going forward, to make sure that we are complying with the law and we're providing long-term benefits to toll payers, and that we're meeting the other essential objectives of this program. So I'll turn it over to Ben Owen, who will make a presentation, who will probably speak very, very fast in this presentation.
I'll try to crank it up a little bit.
I'll leave it with you. But again, there's no action on this tonight. This is basically a briefing of both sort of looking at the projects that have been submitted for the current round of funding, and also making sure we get the priorities right going forward. Ben?
Great, thank you. Yeah, so just since we have a number of new members this evening, and since it's been a while since we've done it, I'll give a kind of a quick introduction, refresher as applicable to each of you on the framework of commuter choice. So this is a sort of a 2 corridor effort. We'll be focusing on I-66 this evening, but we also have a program in the I-395-95 corridor. Basically supporting kind of a range of multimodal transportation improvements with toll revenues. So there's really important element of the program is that anything we fund needs to have a nexus to the people paying the tolls. These tolls are user fees. And so, you know, kind of the way we look at that in our framework is, you know, is a project able to move more people through the corridor each morning, peak period, peak direction, with person throughput increases kind of being a proxy for being able to benefit toll payers in terms of supporting more efficient overall travel in the corridor, and thereby potentially helping to moderate the toll rates. So that's really kind of an important element of our evaluation framework, kind of the first step is looking to see that there's a plausible peak period, peak direction increase. Kind of related to that is that any project needs to support corridor improvement goals, and you see those on the screen. This is sort of our program placemat slide, if you will. Anything needs to contribute to maximizing person throughput and basically implementing viable and effective multimodal transportation options for commuters. And for anything that kind of meets that overarching framework, then we can support a wide range of different types of project. To date, we've supported a lot of transit service and transit capital improvements. I think that's about 80% of our total funding award across the 2 corridors to date. So far, it's been in the several years of the program, about a $92 million total investment for 53 different projects. Next slide, please. So an important element of the program too is just the kind of partnership framework. Commuter Choice really is a state, regional, local partnership as well as a public-private one, in the sense that at least some of the money in each of our 2 corridors comes from private toll road operators. So the roles can really kind of be broken down by, at the Commonwealth level, kind of an oversight role. So the Commonwealth Transportation Board has the final approval authority over projects that the commission selects. The Commonwealth receives annual performance reports from us on how the program is doing and helps us vet project eligibility. At our level at NVTC, we're really kind of focused on administration. So that includes policymaking to kind of strengthen the program within the framework. And I should mention the framework in both corridors is spelled out in memoranda of agreement between us and the Commonwealth that kind of establish all the goals for the program and in general, how things are supposed to work. So policymaking around that, also soliciting, evaluating, selecting, and overseeing projects, and then doing performance reporting. And the Program Advisory Committee has something of an intermediary role between the full commission and local jurisdictions, in that we as staff brief the committee first on proposed policy changes and programs and projects, so that the committee has a chance to kind of think through them, debate the merits of them, make a recommendation before we bring something up to the full commission for consideration. And then at the local level, the focus is really on application and implementation. So, beyond just the day-to-day carrying out the projects, we also have progress and performance reporting responsibilities that they need to comply with, as well as they incur costs and then submit the request to us for reimbursement. Next slide, please. So moving into where we are with our I-66 fiscal year 23 to 24 program. So this is what Mr. Snyder was alluding to in terms of the substance of the recent committee discussion. This actually our most recent call for projects, which closed at the end of January. So we have now done our initial eligibility screening of the proposals submitted in concert with Department of Rail and Public Transportation staff. So we received 11 proposals from 6 applicants, a total funding request of $22.3 million. We've determined that 9 of the 11 with a total request of $21.8 million are eligible, and these will be carried forward into technical evaluation as well as public comment this spring. So in doing our eligibility review, we looked at each proposed project's anticipated benefits to toll payers, as well as consistency with other elements of program policy. So within those 9 applications, there are 4 enhanced bus services, including continuations of service improvements that we funded before. Basically, people have to come back every 2 years to get continued funding for us. Kind of gives an off-ramp if something doesn't perform according to expectations. There are 2 rail capital improvements. The funding request for those 2 is $7 million. But I would note that between the 2, they would leverage over $150 million in other state, regional, and local funds that are either committed now or are expected to be. There's 1 commuter incentive project and then 2 trail construction projects. And just to give you an idea of the revenue picture, things are still not quite clicking again in the I-66 corridor in terms of, revenues coming close to where we would have sort of expected, but it is getting better. We are conservatively expecting $12 million over the 2 fiscal years. Possibility that things will turn up a bit. Hopefully we'll have a better sense of that in the next couple months even. So among the proposals, there was 1 withdrawal by the applicant and 1 that was deemed ineligible just in terms of the extent of benefits to toll payers. So this is sort of what the results of the initial yes/no eligibility review were. I think, what we're going to do at this point is kind of take things into scoring, see how they kind of shake out. When the committee met, we had sort of proposed an approach of, looking at projects by different categories and kind of prioritizing based on that. I think from the discussion at that meeting, I would guess I would characterize it as not necessarily a lot of appetite for prioritizing one type of project over another, but kind of seeing where things end up as we get into the scoring of them. Next slide, please. And so a quick synopsis of the next steps, and the overall timing here is really around getting the ultimate funded program of projects into the coming fiscal year's 6-year improvement program, which will be adopted by the Commonwealth Transportation Board in June. So the overall timeframe around our call for projects and all the steps subsequent to that really lead up to that mid-June approval. So we are getting into the technical evaluation of the 9 eligible applications. We'll be sharing those results with the Program Advisory Committee in mid-April when it meets on the 14th at 8:30 in the morning. We will also seek endorsement of a draft program of projects by the committee at that time. We'll also be opening public comment. It will be a fully online process. For the first time, we'll be producing both English and Spanish versions of all the materials. And we are working on kind of a multi-pronged publicity approach to that. We found that a modest amount of paid locally targeted advertising on social media does help a lot with visibility, but also working through applicants to help them get the word out about to the public about the opportunity to comment. And so in May, we'll come back to the full commission for a briefing on the proposed program of projects, wrap up public comment mid-month and brief the CTB most likely. And then in June, seek the final approvals by the commission and the CTB. Thereafter, move into implementation of funded projects, getting project agreements out once the new fiscal year begins July 1st. So with that, I will wrap up my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Mr. Skiles, go ahead.
As you know, I took an unplanned hiatus from this commission for a couple of years, so I have a quick question on toll revenue. You anticipate 12 million for 23-24.
Correct.
Do you have a sense, or can you remember off the top of your head what the toll revenue for I-66 inside was pre-pandemic?
We were at about $15 million a year or so. At this point, VDOT has indicated they're at about 60% of revenues. It's really kind of in that last 40% where the money really starts to come to us, but it has been gradually ticking up. And since the fall, I think it's been fairly steady with, signs of an upswing recently. So a lot of the money is actually coming from outside the Beltway, from the concessionaire there. $5 million a year are stipulated in our program MOA to kind of augment. The idea was that it would augment the inside collections, but.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Owen? Thank you, Mr. Owen.
Thank you.
Mr. Snyder.
Thanks a lot. The second sort of briefing this evening is the Route 7 bus rapid transit update. That's a project that is moving along that would go, well, as you can see, the corridor, if you've driven in Route 7, on Route 7 lately, I think you understand the need for some bus rapid transit there. And the idea really is to connect the business areas as well as many, many different communities and historic resources along Route 7. With the original use of which I think went back to Braddock's expedition. So it's got a lot of history, that little road, and the idea is to make it a whole lot more efficient and than its current condition. So I'll turn it over to staff to do a quick review of where we are, the particular steps that we're in right now. But you can see it literally is, for a big part of Northern Virginia, at least inside the Beltway, is a very significant sort of spine, if you will, for Northern Virginia. So go ahead.
All right, thank you, Mr. Snyder. Good evening, commissioners. Excellent introduction. You took my first slide and explained it very, very well. So I'm going to actually ask folks to move to the next slide to talk a little bit about what we're diving into. As Mr. Snyder said, it's a BRT project, a bus rapid transit project that is going to connect some pretty significant areas of Northern Virginia, connecting to 2 metro stations, or 3 metro stations actually, a planned BRT down in Alexandria, the West End Transitway. So wonderful opportunity to connect into a lot of transit investments over the next several years. So what we're doing in phase 4 right now is looking at really focusing on the area that you see on the screen there. Basically, the Falls Church segment, part of the alignment from basically the city of Falls Church out to the Beltway. This is phase 4-1. In the future, we anticipate doing the rest of the analysis that will go from the edge of Falls Church all the way down to Alexandria. Prior to this, Fairfax County has done an extensive amount of analysis in the Tysons down to the Beltway segment. So as you can see, we're building piece on piece over here to move things along. So we're looking at this phase, mobility benefits. What is it going to look like? What is the impact of BRT along this corridor? As you know, you introduce segments of dedicated lanes, introduce different bus rapid transit lanes, other signal priority. There'll be a combination of dedicated lanes and mixed use, so it gets a little bit more complicated. So this analysis is going to look at what actually those impacts are on traffic throughout the entire corridor. I think one of the most important parts is stakeholder engagement. We're planning a very robust engagement starting this fall. Over the course of the summer, we're going to be doing a lot of technical down in the weeds analysis, collecting data, some modeling work, some traffic demand modeling work, and moving forward after that. But we're anticipating in the fall to start the stakeholder engagement, reaching out to all of you, the folks along the corridor, help us get those folks out, make sure we're talking to the right people along the corridor, the right groups, the right stakeholders, make sure this is a successful project moving forward. Yeah, next slide, please. So a little bit, very, very brief of what we're doing over the next couple of months. Like I said, the data collection. We gave a similar briefing to the Program Advisory Committee last week. We'll have another update in April of where we stand. There's a lot of information, like I said, the technical work, the traffic simulation, the demand modeling. Folks have been on our consultant team have been reaching out to all of your staff, and they've been very helpful and cooperative, getting us the data we need to make this project successful and continue to move forward. Over the summer, we'll plan for the public outreach, and we'll plan to kick that off sometime in the fall and continue to bring regular updates to the commission and the Program Advisory Committee. So with that, that's the last of my slides. I'm happy to answer. Oh, sorry, I should do one more slide. I apologize. There's one more. A complementary effort that we're working on right now very closely with Fairfax County. So as you all know, we've been working on this project for several years and we've been making very steady progress. But what we've figured out over the last couple of months is like we need to take a step back, move up to about 40,000 feet and look at what is our implementation plan for the next several years. How do we get to the point that we're ready to shovels in the ground, ready to build, ready to start moving forward with the actual construction? As you know, you've probably seen many transit projects over the years. It's a lot of steps, a lot more things to go. Right now, we're in the traffic analysis. One of the next steps is preliminary engineering, NEPA, the environmental work. So what do those steps look like over the next couple of years? Is there an opportunity for phased implementation? Do we have to build it all at once, or can you build segments one on top of each other, building on the success of the previous one? Another one is like the funding, the all important funding discussion. We know there's a lot of different opportunities for funding at the federal, state, regional, and local levels to be competitive for. Part of this is not necessarily what are those funding options, but when. When do you apply for it? When do you make sure that you're really going to be competitive? Doing that takes a lot of time and energy at the staff level to make sure that we're engaging with all of you, preparing for those local commitments, those financial commitments, the time commitments that go into this. It's a lot of moving parts that go into successfully implementing a project like this. We plan to stay very engaged with the PAC, with the commission and staff along this. And one other thing I can't forget is project governance. It's really important as this project crosses 4 jurisdictions: City of Falls Church, City of Alexandria, Arlington County, and Fairfax County, making sure the interests of all of those organizations are represented, who's leading which stage and who's the appropriate entity to lead each stage, and then again, that financial commitment as well. So we are partnering with Fairfax County right now to do this implementation plan. We're working on refining the scope of work. We have it out for comments with local staff to make sure everybody's on board. Once we get some feedback on that over the next week or so, we anticipate coming back to the commission in May to approve releasing an RFP to get this effort moving forward. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions on the Route 7 BRT project.
Any questions for Mr. Phi? I just have a quick comment. Myself being a West Ender in the city of Alexandria, I'm excited for this. As many of you know, there's lots of galas usually in Tysons, and I'm not always fond of driving there. So if I catch a BRT, I'm on All right, well, thank you, Mr. Fry, and I think I'm gonna go back to Mr. Snyder to continue.
Yeah, just going back to the Route 7 BRT, I suspect that Braddock made it up that road faster than we can make up that road today. We're at least trying to get back to the speed of horseback in the 1700s. Anyway, moving on, these are two action items now. So the first is a resolution 2472 to approve a submission of a technical assistance application to Drpt for a Northern Virginia Regional Zero Emission Bus Strategic Plan. So basically, it would be requesting a grant for a total of 480,000, split 50% localities and 50% state. And we know that there's federal interest in this, so potential federal money. This will help us go after that, but for the very positive element of maximizing bus service and at the same time doing it using more modern technology than frankly that we've got out there right now. So that's pretty much what the program is, and I'll turn it over to Patricia to give more of a detailed review.
Great, thank you very much. I'm here to talk tonight about our zero emission bus program, as well as the technical assistance grant application. And so NVTC's transit technology program oversees the zero emission bus efforts, and all of the NVTC partner transit agencies are all at some stage in planning low or zero emission bus implementation or fleet transition. And there's been a tremendous amount of interest and enthusiasm in for working together to realize these programs together. And there's a lot of opportunities to realize economies of scale across the region. And some examples of this include the potential for joint infrastructure and joint procurements, as well as technical assistance opportunities, and ensuring regional compatibility for technology, and also the possibility for the joint funding opportunities. So we've initiated a working group and to share information amongst the region in terms of plans, procurements, funding, and also to provide technical expertise or provide speakers throughout the region. And so the group will meet on a monthly basis, and the first meeting is in March, so later this month. And it'll include staff from NVTC partner agencies. And so we also anticipate opportunities to bring in others in the greater region. And I just want to give a shout out to Renetta from NVTC, who's been instrumental in helping put this together. Next slide, please. All right. Over the past year, as I mentioned, we've been working on zero emission bus efforts, and we held a staff level symposium as well as a commissioner roundtable. And these events took advantage of NVTC's strengths and regional coordination with local flexibility. And we recognize that NVTC is strategically positioned to lead a regional coordinated effort and to identify economies of scale, and also to engage stakeholders, which is something that NVTC has been instrumental in the past. And so we realized that moving this forward requires a coordinated strategic plan, and we're seeking funding for a Drpt technical assistance grant for a zero emissions bus strategic plan. The goals of the plan will be to identify regional zero emission goals and objectives, document strategies for those goals and objectives, and then identify what actions NVTC should take in order to move these programs forward, and also to plan how to collectively utilize the program's partnerships and funding. And so at this point, I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Thank you, Ms. Happ. Any questions for Ms. Happ? Mr. Frost.
Apologize, but I didn't hear the what is when do you expect that plan completed?
So the plan, if awarded, the funds would be available. It's an FY23 grant and the plans would be available July 1. And the program, the grant application is for a 12-month effort.
So within 12 months, the plan will be completed.
That would be that is what is in the grant application, yeah.
Other questions from Ms. Howe? All right. Any other questions about what we've heard so far? Mr. Snyder, can I turn to you for a motion?
Thanks. I move to approve resolution 2472.
Second.
Heard a second from Mr. Drpt since he's closest to my ear. That's okay. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Do we still have Mr. Walkinshaw?
Aye, I'm here.
All right, we get your vote, Mr. Walkinshaw. Thank you. All right, any abstentions or nays? You good? All right, sounds good. So it looks like motion passes unanimously. And Mr. Snyder, gonna turn it back over to you for another action item.
Sure, thanks a lot. So this proposal is resolution 2473 to approve the submission of a technical assistance application to Drpt for a Northern Virginia regional bus analysis. Like the prior action, this is really an effort to approach this from a far more efficient standpoint than to have sort of each jurisdiction go off on its own as we did before, how to coordinate the jurisdictions to get maximum benefit of the dollars for the benefit of the public. So this really will help us look at the overall bus system, being very sensitive to the individual jurisdictions that establish their own systems. But I think now there's a strong desire to look at this more systematically. Are we really moving people from point A to point B in a way that's most beneficial to them and in the most efficient way? So this is the effort here that's part of this grant. Again, it's a $300,000 grant, 50% by the localities and 50% by DRPT. So that's the proposal. Alan, do you want to make any comments on this?
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Again, very eloquent introduction to this. So you've hit most of the high points on here. I think the most important thing also to add is that this is, as Mr. Snyder said, and building on top of the work that's been done. We did a similar effort back in 2016. A lot has changed, as we heard some of the discussion a little bit earlier with WMATA. Lots changed in the transit world over the last 6 or 7 years. So looking holistically at the bus network, making sure that we're building off of the work that all of you are doing individually, pulling it up to that higher level. As Patricia so eloquently stated, the role of NVTC, bringing folks together as a region, looking at things holistically, making sure we're taking advantage of that. Are there opportunities where we can work together? There's several different examples we have in the scope that we're working on: facility, infrastructure, service, lots of different ways that people can work really closer together and build on the working together that's already happening and make it even better. So transit is the best option for folks in Northern Virginia. So that concludes my comments.
Any questions for Mr. Fry? Ms. Bailey?
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to wait to ask this question until both items had been presented, because I'm just curious, will they be happening effectively at the same time? I mean, one of them, if it goes into place in July, it has a year time frame. I don't know what the time frame is on this one, and will there be communications between? They're obviously correlated, and it would be unfortunate to have an emission study that suggests one route outcome infrastructure, and then this transit study that sort of works in another direction. So is there some thought to having some communications yeah.
Absolutely, yes. Great question. So when we were working on these two grants together, there are lots of overlaps to identify. Just when Eva mentions the infrastructure, shared infrastructure, that's going to be a key part of the zero emissions bus. We don't want at a metro station 6 different types of buses coming in with 6 different types of plugs. We want to make sure we're doing it all the same way. So there are opportunities to make sure that the team works together. Patricia will be leading the zero emissions bus. A staff member that we're in the process of hiring will be leading this one. There will be lots of internal communication. And honestly, working with the folks across the region, a lot of them are the same folks at the jurisdictions that cross, and we'll hit them in multiple different working groups and multiple different studies. So make sure that they are having a chance to put in. And similar to the other grant, it is an FY23 grant. We anticipate this will probably take 12 to 15 months, but it would kick off and the money will be available on July 1st, just like the other grant.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Mr. Faust.
Yeah, you mentioned the 2016 study, and I'm just curious, what came out of that, what were changes made? And secondly, when this study is complete, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to, how's it going to result in benefits to the
So looking back at the 2016 study, it really did look at for the ground up at a regional level to see what was out there. We did identify through that some different opportunities for improved coordination. Some of the BRT lines that have been floated out there, they're very conceptual right now, came out of some of the analysis that was there. So there is a lot of stuff that's taken from that, build on now. I think one of the big things is going to be how things have changed, because what may have made sense in 2016 may not necessarily be what makes sense in the modern, what the transit is going to be in the future as we try to figure that out. The other part of your question, the other part of your question is make sure that we did learn a lot from that and make sure that we aren't, like Patricia said, we're not always stepping on people's toes. We're not trying to tell folks what to do. We're not trying to dictate Virginia or Alexandria do one thing or Arlington do something. We're trying to bring folks together. So it's not going to be a study that just sits there. It's meant to be a guiding tool for all the jurisdictions. And as Patricia said, at the regional level, where are those opportunities to guide the commission and the actions that are taken here that can facilitate some of those things, whether it is coordination of service, infrastructure, et cetera. So it's meant to be a guiding document both for the commission itself and then also for the jurisdictions to use as a tool.
I should know the answer to this after all these years, but is there a staff level group from each of the jurisdictions that works together at coordinating and taking the results of studies like this to make sure they work for purposes of transit?
Yes, if there's one thing we do very well is working groups and technical advisory committees. We have a lot of those, but they serve us very well because it does exactly that. It makes sure the communication is happening between us and the individual jurisdictions, but also across jurisdictions and across agencies. We'll have, when we have efforts like this, we usually include Metro, DRPT, VDOT, all the other acronyms of important players when it comes to bus transit, the zero emissions bus going forward, to make sure it's not just something we do, sits on a shelf. We want to make sure it's living, keeps moving. But at the end of the day, there's buy-in from everybody from the ground up, from staff, and then also to the commission level to make sure it's something that we can move forward with.
And Mr. Chair, if I could add, complementing the staff level work, I have routine meetings with all the transportation directors, at least a quarter and some even more frequent than that. So that's one of the things we make sure that we've got the staff working, their peers working, and my peers are working. And that's something that we've really, I think really strengthened over the last sort of 5 to 10 years about that. So one of the things that I was really encouraged by this work, we did it before, which Alan didn't mention, we did internal, we staff and an intern is a very small level. We actually are really looking forward. And we've heard from our jurisdictional staff how much they are looking forward to us doing this study and working with on them. So I'm really excited that we'll be able to hopefully get Drpt funding for it.
Any other questions? Mr. Snyder, can I turn to you for another motion?
Sure. I move to approve resolution 2473.
There's a second. Ms. Bagley for the second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Walkinshaw, aye.
Thank you, Mr. Walkinshaw.
Thank you.
Any abstentions or nays? All right, looks like it passes unanimously. Now we're going to move on to our legislative update. And we are well over halfway through the 2022 General Assembly, with crossover having occurred on the 15th of February. So the General Assembly adjourns in a few days on March 12th, and our Legislative and Policy Committee met on February 17th. So Mr. Meyer chairs this committee, and if you would like to introduce this item.
Yes, we did meet on our committee met on the 17th to discuss those items that crossed over that deal with transportation. Of particular concern to the committee was the House Bill 90 introduced by Delegate McNamara and the Senate Bill 451 introduced by Senator Boysko. And this would, and most of you already know this, will eliminate the grocery tax. And there's no plan at this point, unless Amy tells us otherwise, to replace this loss of transportation funding from the repeal of the grocery tax. This is no small amount of money. We're talking about $135 million. And this is one of the most sustainable sources of our funding for the Commonwealth Transportation Fund. And it will deplete statewide funding for roadway maintenance, transit operations, and other transportation efforts that can't be funded with federal money. In response to this, the committee directed the staff to draft a letter, which they did immediately, and I commend them for that, to go to Senator Saslaw, Howe, and Barker, to identify a replacement source for this revenue. That's about where we are, unless, and I'm going to recognize now our consultant, our lobbyist in Richmond, Amy Seibert, to tell us what might have transpired in the last couple of days. Amy?
Sure. Hello. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everybody. Again, Amy Seibert. I'm down here in Richmond, so I apologize. I was in committee meetings until about 6:30 tonight. So an update on where the grocery tax bills are. So as you remember, Delegate McNamara had it in the House and Senator Boysko's bill was in the Senate. Both bills were slightly different, so they have been put into conference. The conferees were named for that bill conference yesterday, and so it's Senator Boysko, Senator Barker, and Senator Normant are working on the Senate side on those two bills, and Delegate McNamara, Delegate Durant, and Delegate Keem are the delegates. So they appoint 3 people from each house to work on those bills and to come up with a solution to make them identical. And I had been working with Tracy Baynard and the other folks in the Northern Virginia Liaison Group. We've also reached out to the Northern Virginia Chamber. Today, Tracy and I both talked to a couple of our folks in the road building side as well about the idea of doing an enactment clause. Is what we're thinking about doing on those grocery tax bills. So not in the budget itself, but actually on the grocery tax bills. And the idea would be the enactment clause language would be fairly benign language, asking the Commonwealth Transportation Board to look at long-term transportation maintenance, operation safety, and construction needs across all modes, dealing with the sustainability of dedicated state transportation revenue sources. And so the idea was we would look at having the CTB come up with a study in the fall of 2025, because what we do know is that there is enough money at this point, according to everybody, that we can fill the transportation needs for the current six-year plan, both with federal funds and with the over revenues that we have and the surplus of revenues that we have at the state. So everybody says that we can do the projects that we have now. So we're not asking for the revenue source. I know we would like that. That's sort of a no-go this year. But what we want is an acknowledgement that the dedicated funding source is being removed, because we think that's really important. But the idea would be that we'd come up with the answer to this problem in the fall of 2025, and not put this off for another 10 years or too late for us to do this. And then the 2026 General Assembly session would have to consider whatever those options would be. So that's what we're looking at right now. It's based on a letter that NVTC wrote. So again, the idea is looking at that dedicated funding source. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that.
One question is do you believe that the bill that might come out of the conference would include would provide authority to local governments on their own to enact or retain a tax on groceries?
I don't think so. I think it's going to be. I think the sort of nuts and bolts of the bills are going to be pretty similar. But I do think I don't know exactly what all the other hangups are, but I know that they're looking at replacing the money for schools, and they're looking at replacing the money for local governments, but not the transportation piece. So that part's definitely not going to be in there. So that doesn't mean it couldn't be there in the future, but it's definitely not going to be there this year. We've heard that pretty loud and clear from folks that they're not going to be replacing that stream of money this year.
Questions or comments from the commission?
I just want to thank the staff and the committee for the turnaround, this letter that went out. We talked about it in the meeting that night. I think Kate drafted it. I think you maybe caught somebody that night, the next morning at VRE at 9 in the morning. There's Kate with the draft letter.
Tell you, you gotta do
getting
what you gotta
edits.
do.
I mean, it was really fast work, and thank you, Amy, you're, on the front lines. Thank you so much. So just a big thank you. I think it was good teamwork. And great stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, it was very cool. I appreciate that too. Yep.
Yeah, the intent of the letter was simply to say to everybody across the both houses, both parties, open your eyes and make sure that you understand the implications of what you're doing.
I guess the one additional comment I'd make is that transportation being in the infrastructure area, you need long-term predictability and funding because these projects are multi-year projects. And then once you build them, you have to sustain them over multiple years. And then to support bond issuances, you need a steady revenue source. So that's what's driving, I think, a lot of this, which is regardless of the mode of transportation, this is long-term investment that needs a predictable long-term funding. If it's here today and gone tomorrow, it's really hard to move forward on the transportation infrastructure. We certainly respect everyone's views on this.
I mean, we could stay here all night and discuss this, but I think you're absolutely correct. The reality is roads, bridges, sidewalks, trails, they wear out. And when you cut the long-term revenue stream, you really cut off the opportunity to borrow substantial amounts of money to do big projects. What happens is you default to annual maintenance, and for the wealthier parts of the state, they'll respond to constituent complaints for potholes, mowing the median mowing the grass along the medians and on the sides of the roads. A lot of parts of the state won't be able to do that and pick up the loss. And so we're just going to have to be prepared for a less robust program of maintenance by VDOT on some of our main transportation systems. Not to mention even public transit, which is really what this group is all about.
Mr. Walkinshaw has his hand up too. If we could.
Yes.
Give Mr. Walkinshaw.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. When we're beating a dead horse here, I understand that, just one thing I wanted to add to the conversation that I learned relatively recently when I met with VDOT to discuss their spring repaving plans for the Braddock District in Fairfax County. And they informed me that because of the increased presumably labor and material costs and the increased bids that they're receiving from contractors, they're also actually looking at doing significantly less repaving in Northern Virginia than they've done in past years. So this idea in the General Assembly that they have too much transportation money, I think it might be a good idea for them to chat with VDOT. Because VDOT right now, as we speak, is pulling back from secondary road maintenance efforts in Northern Virginia, and I presume other parts of the state as well. And that might be something that Amy can work into her conversations.
Right. When you do work that into the conversation, remind them that deferred maintenance actually exacerbates the cost when you get around to doing it, because the deterioration becomes exponential. So the project costs become more expensive.
Sure. Got it.
Well, that ends my joyful report.
Yeah,
anything on a downer.
Yeah, right.
I'll try to end. I can end it a little bit more positively. Just two other updates just on some of the bills, just to maybe make you feel
All
a
right,
little bit
please.
better.
Go
Yeah. So Senate Bill 281, which Senator Eben put in for us and working with DRPT to deal with the bus procurement issue, is making it through. It's made it through the Senate and it's making it onto the House floor. And that's been doing quite well. We also have language in the budget, in the caboose budget, which means it would take effect when the governor signs it. So that means that bus procurements can start getting out the door, hopefully by the end of April and early May. We can get that taken care of. So that's good news. Also, Elizabeth Bennett Parker's bill dealing with electronic public meetings was heard in Senate General Laws on Wednesday, and it came out. We made some amendments to the bill, nothing huge, but some small changes that we sort of did to sort of tighten it up a little bit to answer some of the concerns on Senator McPike's bill that the Senate had, which died on the Senate floor. And so we made those changes, and it came out of committee yesterday, 12-3. With a few people flipping back from their votes of no on McPike's bill to yes on her bill. So we're hopeful that next week on the floor that bill will pass. So so we're working hard on that bill too. So those are two bills that were NVTC sort of priority bills that we've been working on that are moving through. So better note to end on.
Thank you, Amy.
Sure.
Any other questions for Ms. Seibert? As always, Amy, thank you so much for all the hard work that you're doing down there.
Of course, Alex and I are happy to do it. Thank you.
That's it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. I was going to turn quickly to Ms. McCall, see if she had anything from the federal level.
Just really quick at the federal level, there obviously is there's a continuing resolution that's still holding the federal transit programs that are formula sort of to last year's sort of the pre-infrastructure bill levels. However, FTA did just announce a round of competitive grant programs that are specifically for buses, and these are the ones that have been referenced a couple times this evening, including the low and no emissions bus program. So FTA did go ahead and they have front loaded that, what they call the low no program, and they are making $1.1 billion. That's with the B. Used to be $150 million program, by the way. $1.1 billion available for that program this year. They've also announced an additional $372 million for any bus and bus facility. And these again are capital grants, they are competitive grants, they are nationwide. And so those both have an application deadline that I did not write down here, but I do believe it's in May. One of the important things to recognize, especially for those following on behalf of your jurisdictions, these are competitive grant programs that are federal transit programs, which means there are federal transit rules, responsibilities, paperwork, auditing trails, and a lot of great things associated with conditions for those grant funding programs. We do have a number of jurisdictions. I will not be surprised if this year or the next want to play in that space, but it's definitely something that folks will want to be watching for before they apply. The other thing I wanted to add in there is, and I mentioned this to the executive committee earlier this evening, I've actually been appointed to the legislative steering committee of the American Public Transportation Association. And so I'm really happy to be able to be, this is actually an organization I've been involved with for 20 plus years. But one of the things, the benefits of being within the steering committee, those are the folks who are right there working with FTA and others to really understand how these programs are getting rolled out. I'm going to be a vice chair of one of the subcommittees specifically focused on a lot of the federal procedures. And so I really hope that's going to continue to keep me up to speed on what's going on so I can provide that information back to our localities. So that's what I have. Thank you.
No, great to hear. I'd love to see you in that space, Ms. Matthijs. Any questions on the federal update? All right. Looks like we're going to call up our friends from VRE now. It doesn't look like we have any action items for VRE this month, but we do have Mr. Dalton, the CEO, and his report. Mr. Dalton,
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, commission members, and welcome new commission members. Look forward to getting the opportunity to meet with you. You do have our various reports, I believe, from the past couple of months, maybe in your package. And so just let me just briefly recap a couple of things with our consistent with our continuous push for system reliability. And as measured by on-time performance, both January and February, we achieved above our 90% goal, 92% in January and 95% in February. From a ridership perspective, our, of course, January, primarily with winter weather that impacted ridership. And of course, we had to reduce service level on certain days. And in some cases, we canceled a couple of service days. So our ridership was down in January, but it did pick back up in February. Again, not quite to pre-holiday levels, and definitely not at the levels that we historically seen. But I did also want to say that we do continue to monitor, of course, the projections that are coming out, not only from the federal agencies, but private employers. And in some cases, some of the information that we had been tracking has changed. And so we're trying to get some updates there. But all of that to say, we do have that effort going on. We have various efforts to essentially that are either just starting off or will be starting off here as we start to see some level of exit from the pandemic. And those efforts are focused on capturing new ridership as well. So, but I will say, even in this past week, as projected at the beginning of or end of February, beginning of March, which I guess, yeah, it's this last week, we've had them both in the same week. We've actually seen a couple of our daily ridership numbers have actually been the highest since during this pandemic, albeit a long ways away from where we need to be, but again, headed in the right direction. So, and then just in the spirit, Mr. Chairman, as we are still in a pandemic, just want to remind everybody that we are still currently maintaining a continuity of operations, and our operations are operating effectively. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dalton. Any questions for Mr. Dalton? Mr. Snyder.
One quick question. We had a lot of questions with the Metro General Manager about looking at changes in business models and looking at going after riders that the system hadn't originally gone after before. So are you and your board working on asking similar questions?
The short answer is yes, sir. In fact, later this month at the March 18th meeting, we have various teams, but one that has been focused on the recovery of ridership will be doing some presentations for the operations board to update them on some of these activities and actually some of these metrics that we've been looking at. And then I believe that discussion will be sort of the foundation for ongoing discussions over the next couple of months. And leading into a period where I think at the same time, where we start to recover some of this ridership, there'll be a point though that, and it could be as early as this fall, where that may give us some indication of what the new normal looks like. And then of course, more action and more discussion and more, from a business perspective, we need to be taking a look at what the near term and long term definitely looks like for us. So, and I'll just follow up. My plan too is to share that at the commission level as well as we start going through this over the next couple of months. So you'll get whether it's through an information item, short presentations or something like that, make sure that we're keeping the rest of the commissions up to date as well.
Any other questions? Mr. Dalton, thank you as always.
Mr. Chairman.
Moving on to our next agenda item and our dear Ms. Mitchell and the Drpt.
Thank you. I will keep this short, given the hour. Just a few things. Our grant deadline period did close on February 1st. We're in the process right now of evaluating all of our grant applications, and we will be bringing our draft 6-year plan to the CTE in April. On March 11th, we'll be having a meeting of the Transit Service Delivery Advisory Committee, also referred to sometimes as TSDAC, of which Executive Director Matthijs is a member. We're beginning a 3-year review, which is required by law under our transit funding legislation, is to do a review every 3 years of the programs that we use to allocate our capital and operating funding around the state. So we're beginning that review. We expect that that's going to continue over the summer. Our goal is to have recommendations to the CTB for any changes by September of 22 in order to get that into the next year's FY24 grant application cycle. So I'm sure you'll hear more about that from Kate at future meetings. And then finally, on March 14th, we're beginning a statewide campaign called Rediscover Your Ride. And this is partially funded by a federal grant that we received, but it is a public information and marketing campaign statewide, encouraging people to return to transit. And that's going to include print media, TV media as well. And we are really excited about kicking that off. And that is the end of my report.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. Any questions for Ms. Mitchell? Always happy to have you here with us, Ms. Mitchell. Thank you for all the work that you do. So now we're going to turn to our Executive Director report.
It's always tough to be the last, I promise you. But I did, we actually printed some stuff out, not to do a lot of these things we do digitally. Monthly newsletter continues to get, shinier and prettier, and it's included with all your materials, but I decided to give a printout to you. Big shout out to Monique, who has an amazing eye for this stuff. The other thing is that last time we met, we watched a video about our annual annual report, the actual annual report, which is a digital report. I've also included for you, which highlights the things that we did last year. So I did want to point those out. The commission's is asking me always to get out there and meet and talk to people. There's been a lot of that going on. Some of it's even starting to be in person. Just a couple of highlights on the screen behind of a couple different things. I did some work with the Urban Land Institute, with Metro Now Coalition. I was excited to be a part of going down to the one branding for the Richmond Highway BRT, which was a fantastic event despite the chill in the air. I just want to hip over to the next slide. Again, these are sort of highlights. We've been getting a lot of press pickup recently, even a couple more today. So we're really excited because we're getting our name out between our priorities for the Metro budget to our work on 395 with Transurban, as well as indeed watching what's happening with Route 7, et cetera. And so we're actually really excited. So these are always included in our press clips that we send out every day. If you're not on them already, just let us know. We'll make sure you get on them. And the last thing I think I want to show is it is Women's History Month. And it's one of the things that we're going to be putting out on social media. Again, thanks to Monique, is a real highlight of the women of NVTC. And so, by the way, just warning to some of the past chairs of NVTC. So that's going to be rolling out over the coming weeks. We're going to have a little bit of fun with it. And so that I think is where I'm going to pause as I look to make sure I didn't miss anything. A reminder, we know you guys have a lot of budget hearings and things like that coming up. That is why we're not having an April meeting. But yes, I know we're having some committee meetings so that we can meet various CTB and other deadlines. So there's no commission meeting in April. So we will be reconvening in May. And I think that's it.
Any questions for Ms. Matthijs? Matthijs, as always, thank you for being out there. Like we had asked to be out there talking to folks and getting involved all over the place. I think it shows too with some of the additional press hits that we're starting to get. So it's really great. All right. It was mentioned before, but I guess it's worth mentioning again. No meeting next month. So if you show up, there's not going to be anybody here. We will meet again on May 5th. And without objection, I will adjourn tonight's meeting. So thank you.
Yes, I did.
There you go.